Welcome, everyone, to Washington Crossing Historic Parks 2021 lecture series. Today's lecture is by our Delaware colleague, Kim Burdick, on fever and sickness in the Continental Army. I assure you that this, as timely as this topic is, we actually thought of it well ahead of the pandemic that we're in now. We actually had Ms. Burdick booked long before any of this ever happened. But then, of course, we had to postpone for a variety of reasons, all of which were related to safety restrictions and so forth. I want to start by letting everybody know that we are recording this session, and I am going to read the notification for all of you. This session is being recorded for training and record-keeping purposes. By participating in this session, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of this session. At any time, if you have a question or comment, feel free to place that in the chat box, and we will respond to you as soon as possible. If you would like to ask your question or comment verbally, please note that by doing so, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of your statements recorded as part of this session. That's our standard statement for this program. I want to let you know that we're actually not going to be taking any verbal questions. Please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat box. I will be monitoring them. Everyone, also, if you please keep your cameras off, that will help with bandwidth issues that we might run into. So first, Ms. Burdick will give her presentation, and then I'll go through your questions and post them to her, and we'll get through as many of them as we can. So to begin, let me introduce her. Kim Burdick is resident manager of the historic Hale Burns House. She is the founder of the American Revolution Roundtable of Northern Delaware and is a frequent contributor to the Journal of the American Revolution. Her book, Revolutionary Delaware, was awarded first place in the 2016 statewide writers' competition held annually by the Delaware Press Association. Ms. Burdick is a past chairman of the Delaware Humanities Council and a Delaware advisor emerita of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. She currently serves as executive director of People to People Delaware. She holds an MA in American Folk Culture and Museum Studies from Cooperstown and an MPA in Agency Management from the University of Delaware. And we are very excited to have you here today, Kim. And with that, I will turn this over to you.
Thank you. So thank you. Well, I'm looking at this name, Judy Martin, and wondering if she's one of my Delaware friends. But thank you all very much for attending on a pretty Sunday afternoon. I'm talking to you from the Hale Burns House. Hale Burns House is a house where Lafayette actually turned 20 at a Council of War on September 6th. And so this weekend we're having speakers here. So if you hear the doorbell ring, it's a volunteer, it's okay. One of the things I always liked about Washington's Crossing was the work that Kim did. I actually went up there and took some pictures of her own little interpretive panels to see where they were going up there. And on the Washington Crossing Historic Park website, what it says, and I think probably she wrote it, was, although the world is currently buzzing with the talk of symptoms, infection rates, and incubation periods, sickness and disease are fundamental pieces of human history. The time of General George Washington's crossing of the Delaware River is no exception. Sadly, more soldiers died from illness and disease than on the battlefield during the Revolutionary War. In fact, the graves behind the Thompson-Neely House are those of soldiers who died of illness during an encampment, including Captain Lieutenant James Moore. And in the words of Alexander Hamilton, Moore died on the 25th of December after a short but excruciating fit of illness. So he's buried there, and that's a nice thing to know, because of course they crossed on the 25th and went to New Jersey. So He was, maybe didn't make it over the side, right? Here's a image here of the Thompson Neely house, and a stone thing that is a monument that almost looks like a tombstone that said, "Near this spot, Washington crossed the Delaware on Christmas night." So here's Dr. William Shippen on the 6th of January, 1777. So they're still up there at the Thompson Neely house, which became a hospital. On the 6th of January, 1777, George Washington wrote to Dr. William Shippen Jr., ordering him to inoculate all the forces that came through Philadelphia. Washington explained to him that necessity not only authorizes, but seems to require the measure. For should the disorder infect the army, we should have more to dread from it than from the sword of the enemy. So sort of funny how familiar some of this stuff they're saying in 1777 and 1778 sound to us today. The next year, they're at Valley Forge at the same time period. And we all have learned, in 4th grade, whatever, about the terrible winter at Valley Forge. But perhaps the most notable suffering that occurred there came from something not usually mentioned in textbooks. Disease was a true scourge of the camp. Men from far-flung geographical areas were exposed to sickness, which they had little immunity. During the Valley Forge encampment, nearly 2,000 men died of disease. Dedicated surgeons, nurses, a smallpox inoculation program, and camp sanitation regulations limited the death tolls. Could have been worse, right? The Army kept monthly status reports that tracked the number of soldiers who had died or were too sick to perform their duties. These returns reveal that 2/3 of the men who perished died during the warmer months of March, April, and May, when the supplies were actually more abundant. The most common killers were influenza, typhoid, typhus, and dysentery. Scurvy was actually one of those things that you might expect up there because they didn't have many fresh fruits and vegetables. The teeth on the picture that's here are pretty gruesome, crooked and bloody and yucky, but it's a disease that affects the blood vessels, the skin, and the healing process, and it results in anemia, hemorrhages, and gum disease, and gingivitis. But some of these older pictures have blood all over the teeth. A diet that's lacking in fresh fruits and vegetables like oranges and lemons, even potatoes, can increase your chances of developing scurvy. So that you might expect at Valley Forge for the stories that we usually have. Benjamin Rush wrote, "Hospitals are the sinks of human life in the Army. They've robbed the United States of more citizens than the sword." Now, mind you, he's writing in 1777, so still not true today, probably. He wrote to George Washington that December when they had just kind of gotten settled in at Valley Forge. He insisted on a reorganization of the medical department, noting too many sick are crowded together in one house. I've seen 20 sick men in one room, ill with fevers and fluxes, large enough to contain only 6 or 8 well men without danger to their health. 6 of our surgeons have died since the 1st of last May. From attending the sick under these circumstances, and almost every surgeon in the department has been ill themselves in a greater or lesser degree with fevers caught in our hospitals. Now he's writing from Valley Forge. Here's a picture of a camp follower nurse. And actually the picture is an old engraving, and it shows that these cots these men are on are next to each other. You could hardly stand up in the spaces between them. Surgeons and physicians move from patient to patient without washing their hands. It wasn't such a big deal. Now, every place you go, there's a sign that says, "Please wash your hands." But they went from sick person to sick person with dirty hands. Bed linens of deceased patients were passed along to incoming patients without laundering. Patients were not routinely bathed. Buckets used as toilets were left in the corners of rooms and only occasionally emptied. Flies were everywhere. Ventilation was poor, and with the stench of the sick and the dying, there was little fresh air to be had. In addition, hospitals suffered from shortage of food, medicine, bandages, and other necessary medical supplies. And there's actually very few hospitals in this time period. There are about 20 in all of Pennsylvania, and some of them were just people's houses. Some of them were cabins, but it's not like going to Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine or Temple today. There are very few hospitals as we think of them today. Here's a picture of Valley Forge, which shows the inside of a cabin. And one of the things is a bunch of straw stuffed into a thing that looks like a pillowcase. But this straw bedding is a very germy, dirty thing in these days. Von Steuben, who was an important player at Valley Forge, he put out regulations for the order and discipline of the troops of the United States. His regulations say when a soldier dies or is dismissed from the hospital, the straw he lays on is to be burned and bedding well washed and aired before another is permitted to use it. So whether they actually follow those regulations or not, we don't know, but this happened all across the 13 colonies. Here's one of the things that was a problem, and we're already 2 years into the war by the time you get to Valley Forge, but people are afraid to sign up to be militiamen or soldiers. And that's kind of something that we hear in the news today about people volunteering or doing things because of the COVID. In Connecticut, Jonathan Trumbull wrote to George Washington, "Fear of the infection operates strongly to prevent soldiers from engaging in this service, and the battalions ordered to be raised in this colony fill up slowly." What's going on here? It's not doing its thing. Yeah, we got that far. In New York State, it's General Philip Schuyler from an old Dutch family, of course. He was also concerned about the toll the fear of disease was taking on the recruitment of militiamen in New York. Writing, many potential recruits are extremely apprehensive of being infected with smallpox, not without reason, as it proves fatal to many of them. So if you substitute COVID for smallpox, you sort of begin to see what, there's not much change over time, really. People's personalities and fears remain pretty stable. Smallpox is contagious, disfiguring, often deadly disease that has affected humans for thousands of years. It was largely actually wiped out worldwide by 1980, but it's still a little bit around, the result of an unprecedented global immunization campaign. The pictures of the smallpox look like a million warts all over their skin. And actually here there's a picture of twin brothers, one that was immunized and the other who wasn't. And the one who has the smallpox is covered with little bumps all over his skin, all over his face, all over his little arms. And his brother, nothing. So it's a good thing to get your immunization shots. Scabies is the next thing that looks kind of like that. So Baron de Kalb in 1778, when they're still in that process of getting out of Valley Forge, said, "Our men are covered with the itch." I've seen the poor fellows covered over and over again with scabies. So scabies is less bumpy and funny looking than the smallpox, but it's still little dots all over their arms and wrists and things. And then Whedon's Valley Forge Orderly Book in January 8th of 1778, he says, "Being informed many men are rendered unfit for duty by the itch," and that's the scabies. "Commander-in-chief orders and directs the regimental surgeons to look attentively into this matter, And as soon as the men who are affected with this disorder are properly dispersed in huts, they have them anointed.
What's
for it.
happening?
You can get it? All right. Maybe. There we go. There it is. All right. So we're now in January of 1778. They're still up in Valley Forge. But the Valley Forge winter actually maybe was harder, not just because they were freezing cold and didn't have enough clothes, but because they have scabies, they have all fevers and terrible things, but lots of illnesses were hurting these people. Now, Joseph Plum Martin, if you haven't read the journal of Joseph Plum Martin, you should. It's a really wonderful book. What do you think? When I was inoculated with the smallpox, he wrote, I took that delectable disease, the itch. It was given to us, we suppose, in the infection. So now he has smallpox and he's already been inoculated. Washington insisted that people get inoculated with smallpox. So that was taking a infected person's little piece of skin or some pus and injecting it in somebody else. So they didn't get smallpox, but now they've got scabies. It came maybe in the inoculation. We had no opportunity, or at least we had nothing to cure ourselves during the whole season. All who had smallpox at Peekskill had it. We often applied to our officers for assistance to clear ourselves from it, but all we could get was, bear it as patiently as you can. When we get into winter quarters, you will have leisure and means to rid yourself of it. So I had it to such a degree that by the time I got into winter quarters, I could scarcely lift my hands to my head. So here's an ordinary soldier. He's not a general or any kind of a big shot. He's just a guy who's in the war for the duration. And he now has both smallpox and he has scabies. Fever is the other thing that was really terrible. And fever probably was the biggest thing going around. There was typhus and there was typhoid. The spring of 1778, Lieutenant James Morris of Connecticut was held prisoner by the British in Philadelphia. And so he's in a jail in Philly, and it's similar to the hospitals, but worse. The time that this fellow in the spring of 1778 was in jail, 700 prisoners of war were in the jail. They were soon seized with jail fever, and in the course of 3 months, it swept off 400 men who were all buried in one continuous grave without coffins. Such a scene of mortality I never witnessed before. Death was so frequent, it ceased to terrify, it ceased to warn, it ceased to alarm survivors. So all of these guys are not dying from being shot. Nobody was shooting or in battle in Valley Forge or in Philadelphia. They're all dying from smallpox and fevers and things. As the war effort moved further south, reports of fever and ague increased. Rice irrigation ditches in the south and pools of stagnant shallow water were the home of the Anopheles mosquito. Mosquitoes biting those who'd already suffered from the malaria parasite spread the disease to rich and poor alike. So the story about mosquitoes is if a healthy mosquito bites somebody who's infected and then he flies around and lands on somebody else and bites that person, then the mosquito not only has it himself, but he's giving it to other people. And if people are crammed in there in spaces like this jail in Philadelphia or in Valley Forge and the little cabins and things, it really is very dangerous and contagious. 18th century saying, variously attributed to a German soldier or to Eliza Lucas Pinckney or to the ever popular Anon, summed it up. South Carolina is in the spring a paradise, in the summer a hell, and in the autumn a hospital. So the things that they did, bloodletting, you could have somebody cut a vein and drip it into a dish, or the other thing is leeches. So some of these things sound pretty gross to us, but I suppose they may still do a little bloodletting. There's not many things that they had available to them. And of course, with such a massive number of people being ill, it was pretty tricky to keep up with it. Now, the other thing were plants. This beautiful thing that looks like Queen Anne's lace we have out here on our creek bank, it's actually called poison hemlock. The other thing with pretty little purple flowers is deadly nightshade. And both of these things could be boiled up, made into a tea that had various vitamins and poisons in them. And that became natural medicine, typical kinds of things that they had at their disposal. So you didn't want too much of it. You didn't really want to go eat the berries on the deadly nightshade, but it was used as medicine. Social distancing, what do you think? That's nothing new, right? Dysentery and typhus, known as camp fever, killed more men than musket balls. So in a move radical for the time, Tilton, who actually is from Kent County, Delaware, was the head of the Continental Army's military hospitals. He was then physician and surgeon from 1780 until the end of the war. He separated patients with these kind of contagious diseases. The mortality dropped because he did it, and his system was adopted throughout the Army. So along with individual log huts, if you got a fever, you're going in a log hut with other guys with fever. If you got scabies, you're going in a different one. Tilton ordered the construction of a hospital with 3 non-communicating rooms. One was for patients with fevers, one with infections, and one for the wounded. Imagine if you were wounded, if you'd been wounded when you crossed the Delaware or something, then to be in a building with these other contagious diseases is pretty scary. The hospital's log walls were partially chinked to let in fresh air, and a hole was left in the roof. In the center of each room was a fire pit with beds gathered around like in an Indian hut. And here's a drawing from 1780. And this is what it looked like. So this is a hospital that was designed by a physician. So he's got the little doors here are kind of at the ends of these rooms. And here's the beds, not very largely spaced, but better than they were. Now, some of this stuff sounds pretty familiar, right? Inoculations. Every person willfully endeavoring to spread or propagate the smallpox without inoculation or by inoculation in any other manner than it is allowed by this act or by said recited act in special cases shall be the subject to the penalty of £500 or suffer 6 months imprisonment without bail or man price. So this is 27th of December, 1777. Washington is gung-ho, you are going to get inoculation. And so even today, many people that we know do not want to be inoculated for COVID. This whole idea that you can stop things goes back, way back to the Revolutionary War. And this is a modern picture, obviously, but of a kid getting inoculation. Still today on the news, we're arguing about whether or not children should be inoculated, whether or not children should wear masks. The biggest thing I can see about what is different is that in those days they didn't wear masks, but they were supposed to have social distancing, supposed to have inoculations, supposed to wash your hands. Things didn't really change a whole lot. So that's actually the last slide. But you know, when the French soldiers came, plus ça change, plus la même chose, means the more things change, the more they remain the same. And that's the end of the slides. But it's kind of a funny thing. Did everybody see these at this point of the game? Or?
No.
No,
we weren't able to see any of your screen. I don't know what the issue is because
yeah, that's so
earlier
You
before
did,
we
right?
started recording, you did share your screen and I did see it. So I know that the possibility was there, but I'm not entirely sure what happened with that. So
No,
I have to apologize to everyone for that.
And I can send you the PowerPoint and then maybe you can send it to your people.
Yeah, why don't you do that? I'll email it to everybody that signed up for it, and hopefully they can. I'm sure they'll find it useful. No, hopefully about it. I'm sure they will. And very interesting.
So I'm so sorry, because the pictures are actually what make it.
I know it.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? It was not without its issues, because I had some problems on my end too. So I don't know what to say about that. What I will say is, if anyone has any questions, if you want to drop it into the chat box now, that would be fine, and we can address that. Otherwise,
otherwise you'll have to go up to her. I'll read her little exhibition messages. Thompson House still isn't open, or?
I didn't know you were there, so I'm glad you were able to use it.
I did. It was
all right. We have someone here who says I'm losing them. Their ancestor is listed on the muster rolls in Valley Forge, and they're noted as being, quote, sick in Goshen or in North Windsor. And the question is, can you comment on those locations? Were they hospital camps, and are physician records available?
They went to different places. My ancestor, Joseph Handy from Massachusetts, actually went, I don't know, maybe to Yellow Springs. If you haven't been to Yellow Springs, that's kind of a neat little crossroads community close to Valley Forge. But the thing that I really like about it is that there's a farm there with goats, and they sell beautiful homemade cheese. But but I know my ancestor was sent up there, so maybe yours were too. I don't know all those places, although for a while we did live in Jeffersonville, close to Valley Forge. But I don't know. But there are a lot of little like houses and cabins and things used as hospitals, so it could be anywhere.
Yeah, that's an issue that we address a lot at Washington Crossing, is because there is a long-standing tradition that the Thompson Neely House was a quote unquote hospital, and it wasn't, in the sense of it being ever having been designated. I mean, Yellow Springs, of course, was the only place that was built with the intention of it being a hospital. But a lot of times, as you know, public houses and churches and so forth would be designated for a short amount of time. Thompson Neely did not have that distinction. However, there were sick people there who were being taken care of. So, and for sure, there were, regimental hospitals as part of the regiments that were encamped there that were part of that. So that's sort of where that comes from. But the other part of the question is about physician records. And I guess we should explain that there weren't really any physician records in the way that we know them today. So a lot of times the best way to know whether or not your relative was sick is precisely the way you do, is in the muster rolls, and as if they're listed as being sick. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and the pension rolls.
Pension rolls, yes.
Those are the most useful things. But actually, it's kind of amazing how many letters and diaries and journals exist, and not just the American soldiers, but the Hessians and the British and whoever's around, the French. I actually am in the process of writing a second book, and it's mostly primary documents, pieces of letters that people wrote home. So if you can find, who knows, in your grandmother's attic, maybe, but more likely in the pension records online or something, you'll find a lot more stuff that's what happened to that person individually. And to me, that's more interesting than the history book, because it's what really happened. So if you get a chance, be sure you read Joseph Plum Martin, because he was just a guy, but he was in the war forever. And the way that he
sick a few times.
Yeah, he got every bug that we talked about.
Right, exactly. We have a couple of questions here that I will combine, and it's about the other armies that were here. So how did the British and the French troops fare as far as communicable diseases are concerned.
Just about the same. And in fact, because so many of the Revolutionary War soldiers were British, it's the same diseases. They're probably cousins or brothers of each other, but their primary documents are pretty similar. Hessians, same thing. And mostly when the French came, there was a lot of primary documentation, a lot of letters home, a lot of journals and diaries and things. And so they got the same bugs that were going around that everybody else does. So just like COVID, when you look at the news and you see France had let people stop wearing their masks, and all of a sudden they're back being wearing masks and being isolated and doing all the stuff we're supposed to be doing. Hessians the same way. So people are people, and this pandemic is not that different from these things, most of which, the fevers and the scurvy and so forth, they're just a normal part of life, and people get what they get.
We had a question here about how inoculations were administered. Were there hypodermic needles then, or did you scratch the skin? How did you inoculate somebody in the during the war?
Actually, it sounded pretty gross when I was looking it up.
It is pretty gross, but let's share it.
Well, they didn't have all the fancy tools that we did. They had some, but it sounded in a large part like they would maybe take a penknife or some little thing, make a little cut in somebody's arm, and underneath the loose skin, shove in some pus, some gross little pieces of skin or something. And it worked like an inoculation. There may have been some implements made out of bone, but it's pretty primitive. But just a tiny little cut would allow people to put the yucky stuff in there, and then you were inoculated. Some people got it, some people didn't. And I don't know, it's so funny. Last night I was talking to this volunteer here, and I just sort of wanted to put a gag on him because well, he had COVID twice. He wasn't going to get it. No, he didn't have a shot. And yes, he got it because he was a school teacher. And yikes. So the discussions are not that different in 1778 as they are 2021.
Are there any books that you might recommend as additional reading for anyone who might be interested?
Well, actually, you'll be amazed. The libraries, of course, are closed. You can't just go browse in the university library anymore. But so much stuff is actually on online. You can find almost anything you want. But there are a couple. And when I send my PowerPoint, I'll send the bibliography too.
Okay, very good. And what I did is I just put up the name of your article was Fever, and it was in the Journal of the American Revolution. So if you go on the website for the Journal of the American Revolution, it's open to everyone. It's free. And if you do a search, you can either look for the title or you could look for Kim Burdick, and a few of your pieces will come up, and then people can read that and see your bibliography for that, and also for the PowerPoint that we're going to distribute to everyone rather. If there aren't any more questions, I'm going to thank you for joining us after so long, especially during this very unusual time given the subject matter. And I want to thank all of our registrants and people who have stuck with us through our little technical difficulty here. Just so you know, prior to the start of the talk, we were testing the share screen and it worked very well. So it is just one of those things that happens sometimes. So thank you all for bearing with us. And all right, we have one more question and then we'll sign off. Was Benjamin Rush's pamphlet on military medicine published during the war or only after?
I think it was published during the war, but we don't know. Can you see it now? Is it doing anything? No, still not. Isn't
No.
that weird?
Somebody here said it was done in 1778. So there you go.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. I am going with that. I'm going to bid you all a very good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us. And in October, we're going, I think it's the 17th, check the park's website. We have a lecture by Matthew Costello, who is a historian with the White House Historical Association. We're hoping to do it in person. But we're going to have Zoom as a backup just in case. So
Just in case.
take a look for that. All right. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording now.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me.